Sure, my name is Sunjya Schweig. I feel very honored to have had the opportunity to conduct several different research studies, to participate in several different research studies with Dr. Ying Zhang and team at Johns Hopkins and my good friend and colleague, Jacob Leone. We came across the idea to basically pursue the model that Dr. Zhang had already in place. He has tested a bunch of different antibiotic combinations and single antibiotics, as well as essential oils, a variety of different natural products. So we collaborated with him after brainstorming to use botanicals, botanical medicines, and natural products which are commonly used already in the field, by patients anecdotally, by providers, and there's mixed data on those. And so we realized that we had the opportunity to work with Dr. Zhang and his model and to look at some of the in vitro testing on these products to understand a little bit better what the activity and what the potential was for them to treat Borrelia burgdorferi, which is the Lyme disease spirochete, but also co-infections like Babesia and Bartonella. Yeah, my wife has Lyme disease. She originally got sick when we were living in upstate New York in Ithaca. She was at graduate school at Cornell University and doing a bunch of field work, leading undergrads out into the field, and nobody told us anything about tick-borne disease. We didn't know that it was a risk. We didn't know how prevalent it was, and we had no idea what the symptoms were. And like many people's stories, she became acutely ill with shortness of breath and heart palpitations and severe anxiety out of the blue, sleep disruption, and was worked up by many different doctors, by her primary care doctor in the student health facility. That led to referrals to therapy and psychiatry, as well as cardiology, and they did a bunch of testing and studies. Nobody ever tested for Lyme disease, cardiac workup showed some changes that were concerning, but nobody could explain, and nobody thought about Lyme disease or Lyme carditis. And she had new onset arrhythmia, palpitations, as well as a murmur, which hadn't been present prior. And so, basically she was given a workup from a medical, standard medical point of view, and just told, we don't know what it is. And so we kind of just went on with our lives for almost 10 years. And then a decade later, in hindsight, we realized now, after a second tick bite, some months after we were camping at a music festival in Mendocino, which is sort of the California hotspot for Lyme. It was a day, early October, and I remember we were driving to San Francisco, and she had trouble driving because of acute onset joint pain and elbow pain and neck stiffness. And we didn't know, again, what we know now about Lyme disease. We're not taught much on it in medical school. It was through consultation with colleagues that we were able to find appropriate tests. Fortunately for her, her Western blot was positive, and she was diagnosed with Lyme disease. We started her on somewhat aggressive treatment, which lasted for many, many months and included both antibiotics as well as functional medicine, integrative medicine. Fortunately, she made a good recovery. And so it was that experience that first took me down the rabbit hole of reading about and studying and going to conferences and meeting with people like Dr. Burrascano and Dr. Horowitz, and just learning anything we could to try to help her. And gradually, as patients understood that that was an area of interest of mine and something that I was willing to treat and willing to think more deeply about, they started coming to me. And it was gradually over time that my practice transformed into more of one of trying to work with and help people with chronic infections and tick-borne diseases. Yeah, so in looking at some of the botanical medicines that we chose to study, my colleague Jacob Leone and I were careful to try to pick botanical medicines and natural products which met several different criteria. Number one, we wanted them to be safe. We wanted them to be easily absorbed orally. We wanted to understand that there was some literature, preclinical at the minimum, that supported their use. And possibly clinical in other modalities, other illnesses, other disease conditions. And also we wanted to test things that people were already using. And so we wanted to basically take this sort of body of botanical medicines and natural products and provide some new scientific data on it. And it's important to understand that the studies are laboratory studies, are test tube studies. So some people want to take the information and make that leap that because of the efficacy that we're seeing in the test tube, that translates to efficacy in the human or in an animal model. And we can't definitively make that leap yet. But I think what's really encouraging is that, a lot of people are already using these medicines, and they're doing it safely, and they're doing it frequently with benefit. And so then I think what I get excited about is, that we're able to provide just another layer of scientific data. For example, the top botanical medicines that we found effective against all 3 pathogens, Borrelia burgdorferi or Lyme, Babesia, and Bartonella. Botanical medicines like Cryptolepis or Artemisia, or Japanese knotweed, Polygonum cuspidata. We knew that they were active in previous research against some of the pathogens or other pathogens, for example, Cryptolepis and malaria, but we did not know that they were potentially active against these co-infection organisms or the Borrelia spirochete. So I think it just makes sense now to use that data potentially to broaden some of the treatment protocols that we're using. And then we can talk about next steps, but we need real world data, and we need, human model, animal model data to hopefully prove out some of those findings so that we can then more confidently say, we understand what the activity in the human is. It's hard to sort of look into the future and decide, sort of what's going to be, quote unquote, the cure, because as we learn about Borrelia and we learn about these co-infections, we come to understand that they are extremely smart and extremely elegant, and they've been around for billions of years. If you look at the tree of life, the ancestors of the spirochete is way down at the base of the tree, and our ancestors are way up at the top. And so they've seen us evolve. I do believe that part of the answer will come from botanical medicines, but I think it's always going to be a synergy. It's always going to be using things in combination, rotating treatments, working really, really hard with the individual on what some of their unique underlying weaknesses are, or what their weak points are, and how these infections manage to take hold in the first place, right? What's the terrain? What can we do with their nutrition, and with their gastrointestinal healing, and with their emotional healing and mindset, and what can we do with their sleep and movement? But I also really respect the pharmaceutical antibiotics. There's a lot of patients they really help. And so it's just a matter of finding, which treatment is right for the individual patient at that given moment in time. The process of going from something that you're studying in the laboratory or in a test tube all the way to a clinically approved medication is extremely long. And the odds of finding those compounds and then developing them into a patentable medication are pretty low. And so there's a lot of complexities on that in terms of some of these botanical medicines, most of them are not patentable. Makes finding and isolating active components and then developing those into an effective, marketable therapeutic, it does make that attractive, because it's one way for the pharmaceutical companies to make money. But again, it's kind of, like a roulette game. And so, the odds are low, the time runway is very long, 5-10 years probably at the minimum, but there are rewards to be had. So there are interested parties, and there are ways to get grant money in these areas, and to get commercial funding even, but it is a very long process. Yeah, that was a finding that we had a careful eye on. And again, there's a lot of factors that go into it. We did work to test the same preparation that they had used. However, it's possible that there was different dilutions, or that the cell culture was, working a different way. And so There's a variety of potential reasons why we could have found different results from what they found. The grapefruit seed extract was an interesting story for us because we were careful prior to the research to test the botanical medicines and natural products for contaminants or for pesticides or other active compounds potentially that might exert a killing effect on the Borrelia. So we wanted to make sure that the effect was actually from the active ingredient itself as opposed to some additive or contaminant. And one of the most commonly used grapefruit seed extracts that is used in the lay public was found to contain pesticide residues. And so, we were concerned that that might potentially be part of why people notice either a Herx side effect from it or that might itself have some anti-Borrelia activity. There was one commercially available product that's used commonly here, which did show some activity, however, did have the contaminant. And then the grapefruit seed extract that we were able to test, a European product which was tested clean from any contaminants, did not show any activity. And so we were definitely impressed by that finding. Yeah, we do believe that botanical medicines are less likely to for the bacteria to become resistant to them. It can happen, but part of the reason for that is that, again, botanical medicines have hundreds, if not thousands, of different active compounds, and so it's much more difficult for a bacteria to, quote unquote, figure them out or for them to, again, develop resistance, whereas a pharmaceutical antibiotic has usually one activity. And so once the bacteria can get smart to that, they're able to pass that knowledge to each other and pretty quickly, again, develop resistance. So again, yes, there is a risk with resistance. We're seeing some resistance also in treating Babesia, both to pharmaceuticals as well as to some of the natural products. But what we try to do in that case is to use combinations and to use rotating protocols so that we give more pressure in different active systems for the bacteria and hopefully help to avoid the development of resistance. I think that's also part of the reason, in a safe way to use combinations of pharmaceutical antibiotics with herbal medicines, but that really does have to be done safely and carefully, with a knowledge of what some of the potential interactions are. So we're always careful for people to be trying that at home. There are botanical medicines which could reduce efficacy or increase clearance of antibiotics, but also other medications that people might be on for other symptom management. So it does become complex. Yeah, given my experience in this field for almost 20 years, I don't really hope for a silver bullet. I think that the complexity of the infection, the complexity of the multi-organ system dysfunction that people experience, the many, many different symptoms across many different body systems, I think it's going to continue to elude a single treatment that can, quote unquote, cure people. It's very multifactorial and very complicated. So I do believe that using the botanical medicines either individually or together is going to continue to help us treat these patients. And also I think it's really exciting for us to start to develop data showing new data, adding to the field. For example, Cryptolepis, which has been known to be a very powerful herbal medicine for a variety of different infections, but especially malaria, we're seeing, and it's been used anecdotally in the field for Babesia, but to then see that also active against Borrelia and also active against Bartonella, really very interesting and kind of lends credence to the possibility that maybe this should be a botanical medicine that's towards the top of our treatment toolkit when we're concerned about Lyme disease and co-infections. And as many of us know, both practitioners and patients, the testing that we have, the diagnostic testing, is not great, to be kind. It's pretty problematic, and that's one of the goals of the Bay Area Lyme Disease Foundation, to develop better diagnostics and to develop better treatments, because it's a huge need in the field. But when we can't test for them and we're going by people's clinical pictures and their symptom reports, etc., having treatments which are potentially active against multiple pathogens can be really powerful. Yeah, I think it's very important for us to understand that there's a divide between how the scientific community works and how some of these research studies work, especially when they are test tube based or laboratory based and not in animal models or human models. The research is published, and then there's splashy headlines that say this botanical or that botanical is active against this pathogen, and very shortly after that headline is some caveats and a deeper explanation. But many people either don't read that or don't understand what the differentiation. And so it is very common for people to then get really excited and to start trying things. And we have had a lot of inbound interest and questions, asking for specific dosing and specific protocols. And and I always have to remind people that this is a test tube study. And it's easy to then pivot also and say, but these are botanical medicines that people are already using, right, with a fairly good track record, right, as long as people are using them knowledgeably and carefully. So there's a balance that has to happen, right, for continuing to educate the public. But it's also really critical for us to continue to do more research and to take those basic science findings, those laboratory-based findings, and work to generalize them in the animal models, in the human models. And I think we do have an opportunity, especially since these botanical medicines are already being used, to potentially jump towards, maybe more quickly towards some human trials and looking at, treatment outcomes in human subjects. Obviously, that's a complex path forward, but one that we do remain optimistic about.